I came home after a long day, already dreaming of sinking into my couch with a cold drink in hand, only to stop dead in my tracks. My backyard, my private property, was filled with laughter, clinking wine glasses, and a group of well-dressed HOA ladies lounging around as if they owned the place. A large table draped with an elegant white cloth sat right in the middle of my lawn, adorned with wine bottles, gourmet snacks, and decorative candles. A portable speaker hummed soft jazz in the background, and my outdoor furniture had been rearranged to accommodate what looked like a full-blown wine night. At first, I thought I had lost my mind. Maybe I had accidentally wandered into the wrong backyard? But no, that was definitely my lawn, my patio, my grill, and my property being used without my consent. My confusion quickly turned to frustration as I scanned the group. At the head of the table, swirling a glass of red wine like she was hosting a private event at a five-star restaurant, was Karen. She was the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, notorious for her over-the-top enforcement of neighborhood rules, excessive fines, and her general belief that she was in charge of everyone's property. She wasn't just any HOA president. She was the type who measured grass length with a ruler and issued citations if your front door wasn't in a pre-approved color palette. Seeing her sitting there, laughing and chatting as if my backyard was some kind of community lounge, made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that yelling would only escalate the situation. I marched forward, determined to get answers. As I approached, Karen finally noticed me. She barely looked up from her wine glass before flashing me a fake smile. "Oh, you're home," she said in a tone that was far too casual for someone trespassing on my property. "I hope you don't mind, but we decided to have our little gathering here tonight. It's such a lovely space." She gestured around as if she had done me a favor by gracing my backyard with her presence. I was too stunned to respond immediately. My eyes darted around to the other women, most of whom avoided eye contact, clearly aware that something about this situation wasn't right. "Excuse me," I finally managed, my voice sharp. "I don't remember agreeing to this." Karen let out a light, dismissive laugh as if I had just made a silly joke. "Oh, you must have forgotten. We talked about it in the last HOA meeting." That was a lie. I hadn't attended the last meeting because, like most sane people, I avoided unnecessary HOA drama. Before I could call her out, my neighbor Tom, a fellow HOA skeptic and someone who actually had my back, appeared at the fence, leaning against it with an amused smirk. "Yeah, about that," he said. "She sent an email out this morning saying your backyard was kindly offered up as the location for tonight's gathering." I turned back to Karen, my patience thinning. "I never agreed to that." She waved a dismissive hand. "Well, it's a community event, and since your yard is one of the largest, we assumed you'd be happy to host. It's for the good of the neighborhood, after all." That's when it hit me. She hadn't asked because she knew I would say no. She had simply decided that my property was available for her use and went ahead with her plans. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "Karen, this is my private property. You can't just hold an event here without permission." She sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. "We're almost done anyway. No need to make a fuss." She turned back to her wine, signaling that as far as she was concerned, the conversation was over. Meanwhile, her guests, emboldened by her nonchalance, continued their gathering as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. I glanced around, noticing just how much they had made themselves at home. Some of them had even taken the liberty of moving my outdoor furniture around to create a cozy seating arrangement. Someone had set up a small side table near my grill, which was now occupied by a platter of expensive cheeses. Worst of all, one of them had actually fired up my barbecue and was grilling skewers like this was their own backyard cookout. Tom let out a low whistle. "They really made themselves comfortable, huh?" I let out a sharp breath. Unbelievable. But Karen wasn't done testing my patience. "Oh, and by the way," she added, her voice dripping with casual authority, "we'll probably be doing this every Friday. Isn't that just wonderful?" My fists clenched. Every Friday? She was actually claiming my backyard as a permanent HOA event space? The entitlement was staggering. I had to stop myself from outright laughing in disbelief. This woman had truly convinced herself that she had the right to dictate how my property was used. I took a slow step forward, my voice calm but firm. "No, you will not be doing this every Friday. In fact, you will not be doing this again at all." Karen raised an eyebrow as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "Oh, don't be so selfish," she said, taking another sip of wine. "It's just a little get-together." I could feel my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just some casual misunderstanding. This was deliberate disrespect. I had tried reasoning with her, but she had no interest in respecting boundaries. She had decided my property belonged to her HOA social circle, and that was that. Tom leaned in slightly, his smirk growing wider. You know, you could always call the cops for trespassing. Karen scoffed. Oh, please. The HOA has permission to use common spaces, and this benefits everyone. It's in the best interest of the community. My patient snapped. This isn't a common space. This is my backyard, private property. And since you refused to leave when asked, you are now trespassing. That got some of the women's attention. A few of them exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing they had overstepped. But Karen, she wasn't backing down. She placed her wine glass down carefully and stood up, leveling me with a condescending stare. You're being ridiculous, she said. There's no need to get worked up. We'll be done soon. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You have 10 minutes to pack up and leave, I said, my tone cold. Or you're going to regret it. She smirked, completely unfazed. Oh, and what exactly are you going to do? I simply smiled. You'll see. I turned and walked away, heading straight into my house. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't care. I had played nice. I had given her the chance to leave peacefully. But since she wanted to act like my property was hers to use freely, I decided it was time to teach her a lesson. Tom raised an eyebrow as I passed him. You've got something planned, don't you? I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. The smirk on my face said it all. Karen had made one fatal mistake. She had assumed that I would just roll over and accept her authority. But she was about to learn the hard way that when you disrespect someone's property, there are always consequences. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to my smart home controls. My sprinklers were fully automated, high-powered, and covered every inch of my backyard. I hovered over the activation button, watching through the window as Karen took another smug sip of wine, completely oblivious to what was coming. I took one last glance at the scene before me, then pressed the button. As I stood inside my house, watching through the window, the sheer audacity of Karen and her group continued to astound me. They weren't just having a casual get-together. They were fully immersed in their self-proclaimed backyard paradise as if they had every right to be there. The soft glow of string lights illuminated their smug faces. The scent of sizzling meat wafted through the air from my own grill, and laughter rang out as if they had no care in the world. It was the kind of entitled arrogance that made my skin crawl. They genuinely believed that this was their space now, that I had no say in what happened on my own property. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was infuriating. Karen, still sipping her wine, glanced around with a satisfied expression, as if she were the queen of some exclusive private club. Every now and then, she gestured around dramatically, making grand statements to her guests about how perfect the ambience was and how lucky they were to have such a lovely meeting space. My backyard, my furniture, my grill, and yet she was talking about it as if it was some HOA-sponsored luxury lounge she had graciously provided for them. I clenched my jaw, feeling the last remnants of patience slipping away. I turned my gaze to the rest of the women. Most of them were well into their drinks, leaning back comfortably in their chairs, completely at ease. A few had even kicked off their shoes, their bare feet resting on my outdoor ottoman as if this was some all-inclusive resort. One woman had set her wine glass down on my patio table without a coaster, leaving a faint ring behind. Another had draped her shawl over one of my lounge chairs, marking her territory like she planned to be here every week. As my eyes swept across the scene, I noticed something else that made my blood boil. My security cameras, small, barely noticeable devices positioned strategically around the backyard, had been tampered with. The one facing the patio was now tilted downward, clearly adjusted so it wouldn't capture the gathering. Someone had deliberately moved it, likely to make sure there was no record of their little trespassing escapade. My fingers tightened around my phone. They had gone out of their way to make sure I wouldn't have evidence of this. That meant they knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. They had planned this out, knowing full well that I never agreed to it. Karen let out a satisfied sigh, tilting her head back slightly, as if basking in her own self-importance. Then, as if to solidify just how deeply she believed she was in charge, she spoke again. I was thinking, she mused, we could do this every Friday. It's just so convenient, don't you think? The perfect setting. So much better than cramming into one of our small patios. She let out a light, airy laugh, as if the thought of ever using her own home for these gatherings was beneath her. The other women murmured their agreement, nodding and raising their glasses in some unspoken toast to their newfound luxury hangout. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to remain calm. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to waste my breath trying to reason with someone who had no interest in logic or facts. I had already given them the chance to leave, and they had made it clear that they weren't going anywhere. That was fine. I had another way to get my point across. I glanced at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the sprinkler activation button. A simple tap was all it would take. I took one last deep breath, then pressed it. At first, there was only a slight hiss, the faintest warning before the chaos erupted. Then, in an instant, the sprinklers burst to life, sending high-powered streams of water shooting in every direction. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Wine glasses slipped from fingers, plates clattered to the ground, and shrieks filled the air as the once composed HOA ladies scrambled to avoid the sudden downpour. Karen's face contorted in shock as a jet of water hit her square in the chest, drenching her expensive silk blouse in seconds. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair as she sputtered in outrage. Around her, the rest of the women flailed in panic, their perfectly styled hair now plastered to their faces, their expensive outfits clinging to them in a mess of soaked fabric. One woman tried to shield herself with a napkin, only for it to immediately become useless under the relentless spray. Another attempted to grab her purse from the patio table, only to slip on the now slick surface and nearly fall face first into the grass. The grill sputtered violently as water doused the flames, sending up a hissing cloud of steam. The carefully arranged cheese platter was now a soggy, ruined mess. One of the women, in her haste to escape, tripped over her own chair and landed on her hands and knees in the mud, shrieking in horror at the state of her designer outfit. Karen, soaked and livid, turned her furious gaze toward my house. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the spectacle with a perfectly neutral expression. She stormed toward me, water dripping from her clothes, her face twisted in rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screeched, her voice cracking as she wiped wet strands of hair from her face. I raised an eyebrow. "Watering my lawn." Her nostrils flared. "You did that on purpose." I tilted my head slightly, feigning innocence. "Did I? Or were you just unlucky enough to be standing in my yard when my automatic sprinklers turned on? It's a scheduled setting, you know." The look on her face was priceless. She knew I was lying, but she also knew she had no way to prove it. The other women, now dripping and humiliated, were already gathering their things in a hurry, eager to escape the nightmare. "You'll regret this," Karen hissed, her voice low and venomous. "The HOA doesn't take kindly to this kind of behavior." I gave her a slow, easy smile. Neither do homeowners who don't like trespassers. With that, I turned and walked back inside, leaving them to deal with the mess. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to raise my voice. The point had been made, loud and clear. They wanted to treat my backyard like their personal clubhouse? Fine. But they had just learned the hard way that when you disrespect someone's property, there are consequences. As I watched through the window, Karen stood there for a moment, fists clenched, before stomping off, her wet heels sinking into the muddy grass. The last of the women followed, some still muttering in disbelief, others too embarrassed to say anything at all. One thing was clear. Their perfect little wine night had been completely and utterly ruined. Tom, who had been watching the whole thing from his own yard, let out a loud laugh. "That," he called out, "was the best thing I've seen all year." I smirked, and it's only March. As I shut the door behind me, I already knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was going to try something, some pathetic attempt at revenge. The thought didn't worry me. If she wanted to turn this into a battle, she was going to find out the hard way that I wasn't the kind of homeowner she could push around. And if she tried anything else, well, I still had plenty of tricks up my sleeve. Karen's departure should have been the end of it. The backyard takeover had been an outrageous stunt, but after the chaos with the sprinklers, I assumed she would finally understand the message. I was wrong. The very next morning, I woke up to find a bright yellow HOA violation notice taped to my front door. The words "unauthorized sprinkler usage during community event" were printed in bold letters, followed by a fine of $500. $500 for watering my own lawn. I let out a laugh, shaking my head at the absurdity. They had made up a brand new rule overnight, all because their little wine party had been ruined. I tore the notice off the door, crumpling it in my fist as I walked back inside. I should have expected this. Karen wasn't the type to take embarrassment lightly. She had been humiliated in front of her social circle, and now she was scrambling for any way to reassert control. She had to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was still in charge. The HOA was her weapon of choice, and she was going to wield it however she could. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't the kind of person who would just roll over and accept this nonsense. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. I grabbed my phone and dialed my neighbor. As soon as he picked up, he was already laughing. "Let me guess," he said. "You got the fine too?" I blinked. "Wait, you got one?" He snorted. "Yep." Apparently, I was an active participant in the disruption of a community gathering. I could hear the amusement in his voice, but I knew he was just as annoyed as I was. "They can't actually enforce this, right?" I asked. "There's no way this is a real rule." Tom let out a sigh. "It's not, but that's how they operate. They make up fake infractions, hope people are too scared or too lazy to fight them, and then they pocket the fines. It's their little power trip." I clenched my jaw. That was exactly what this was, pure power abuse. Karen wasn't just being petty. She was trying to establish dominance, to make it clear that she was in control of the neighborhood, and that no one could challenge her without facing consequences. Well, I had news for her. If she thought a fake fine was enough to make me back down, she was in for a rude awakening. "I'm going to the HOA meeting," I said. Tom let out a low whistle. "This is going to be fun." That evening, I walked into the HOA meeting with my shoulders squared and my expression calm. But inside, I was practically buzzing with anticipation. I wasn't just here to argue. I was here to put an end to this nonsense once and for all. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland, beige room with folding chairs arranged in neat rows. At the front, behind a long table, sat the HOA board members, with Karen positioned squarely in the middle like a queen presiding over her court. She spotted me the moment I walked in, her lips curling into a smug smile. She thought she had already won. She thought I was just another homeowner about to grovel for mercy, to plead my case like some peasant before a ruler. I took a seat in the front row, arms crossed, and waited. The meeting droned on for the first 30 minutes with Karen going through the usual HOA nonsense. Updates on community landscaping, reminders about trash compliance, discussions on approved exterior paint colors. The sheer pettiness of it all was almost impressive. Then, finally, she reached the topic she had been waiting for. "We need to discuss a recent issue regarding property use and HOA event disruptions," Karen announced, her eyes flickering toward me with barely concealed glee. "As you all know, the HOA organizes regular community gatherings to foster a sense of unity among residents. Unfortunately, certain individuals have displayed behavior that goes against the spirit of our neighborhood." She clasped her hands together, shaking her head as if she were deeply disappointed. "Last night, during a scheduled community event, sprinklers were deliberately activated, causing significant distress to attendees." I let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Distress?" I repeated. Karen ignored me. "As a result, fines have been issued for the inappropriate use of water during an HOA event," she continued, her voice dripping with self-importance. "This behavior will not be tolerated, and we expect all residents to respect the rules and the integrity of our community." She finally turned to me fully, her eyes glinting. "If the homeowner responsible would like to come forward and explain their actions, they may do so now." I stood up slowly, letting the moment stretch. All eyes were on me. I could feel the tension in the room, the anticipation thick in the air. Karen's expression remained smug, convinced that she had me cornered. I took a deep breath, then pulled a stack of papers from my pocket. "First of all," I said, my voice loud and clear, "this so-called event was never authorized. It was held on private property without the owner's consent. That alone is trespassing." I unfolded the first sheet and held it up. "Second, according to the official HOA bylaws, which I have printed right here, there is absolutely nothing stating that the HOA has the right to impose fines for personal sprinkler use." Karen's smile faltered slightly. I pressed on. "Third, I have security footage showing that someone tampered with my backyard cameras before the event started, which suggests that they were well aware they were doing something wrong." I tapped the stack of papers against my palm. "So, if you want to talk about violations, maybe we should start there." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few board members exchanged uncertain glances. Karen's jaw clenched. "This meeting is not about," she began, but I cut her off. "Oh, but it is," I said smoothly. "See, if you're going to start making up rules, you'd better be prepared to follow the real ones. And the real ones say that you have no authority to issue these fines." I let my words hang in the air, watching as realization dawned on the rest of the board. Karen was grasping at straws, and everyone could see it. Finally, One of the other board members, an older woman with graying hair and a stern expression, cleared her throat. "If there's no bylaw supporting this fine," she said slowly, "then we can't enforce it." Karen's head snapped toward her. "We need to maintain order," she insisted, her voice rising. "If we let people just do whatever they want, then what's the point of the HOA? I smiled. "The point," I said, "is to serve the community, not to harass homeowners with made-up rules." The murmuring grew louder. More board members nodded in agreement. Karen's face turned red with frustration. She opened her mouth, probably to throw out some last-ditch effort to save face, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. "The fine is revoked," another board member announced, "and we'll need to review any other violations issued under unclear circumstances." Karen looked like she was about to explode, her fingers clenched into fists on the table, her eyes burning with rage. But she couldn't argue. She had lost. I sat back down, satisfied. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a major victory. Karen had tried to punish me, tried to flex her power, and she had failed spectacularly. I had proven that I wasn't afraid to stand up to her, and now the rest of the neighborhood had seen her for what she truly was, a petty, power-hungry bully. As I walked out of the meeting, Tom clapped me on the back, grinning. "That was beautiful," he said. "Think she's going to back off now?" I shook my head. "Not a chance," I said. "But that's fine. Let her try. I'm ready." The silence that followed Karen's defeat at the HOA meeting was temporary, and I knew it. She wasn't the type to take public humiliation lightly, and the way her face had burned with frustration told me that she was already plotting her next move. If she couldn't find me into submission, she'd find another way to make my life difficult. That was the kind of person she was, someone who had built her entire identity on control. Now that she had lost it, she would do anything to take it back. The first sign of her retaliation came the very next morning. I woke up to find a notice taped to my mailbox, this time accusing me of violating community noise ordinances. Apparently, my sprinklers had created a public disturbance and had caused emotional distress to multiple HOA members. I let out a laugh, shaking my head at the sheer absurdity of it. Emotional distress from getting a little wet. It was almost impressive how far she was willing to stretch reality just to paint herself as the victim. I wasn't the only one targeted. Tom sent me a text not long after, saying he had received a warning about unneighborly behavior for simply watching the incident from his own yard. Another neighbor, an older woman who rarely got involved in HOA politics, mentioned that she had overheard Karen complaining that I was a dangerous influence in the community. That was how she operated. If she couldn't punish me directly, she would try to turn the neighborhood against me. For the next few days, little things started happening. My trash bins, which I always placed neatly at the curb, were suddenly being accidentally knocked over. The HOA newsletter contained a thinly veiled statement about certain residents who were refusing to abide by community standards. A few of the HOA loyalists, the ones who always sided with Karen no matter what, started giving me dirty looks whenever they passed by. It was all petty, childish nonsense, but it was clear that Karen was trying to send a message. The final straw came when I found an official-looking letter in my mailbox. At first glance, it seemed like a legal document, filled with complicated language about property violations and HOA authority. But as I read through it, I quickly realized that it was nothing more than a scare tactic. It claimed that because of my repeated disregard for community rules, the HOA had the right to review the suitability of my continued residence in the neighborhood. In other words, they were pretending they could kick me out. I laughed out loud, shaking my head at the ridiculousness of it all. Karen was grasping at straws, hoping that if she threw enough nonsense at me, I would eventually cave. But what she didn't realize was that every single thing she did only made me more determined to stand my ground. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. The next day, I decided it was time to fight back. I spent the morning gathering every HOA document I could find, reviewing the bylaws word for word. I contacted a lawyer friend who confirmed exactly what I already suspected. Karen had no real authority to enforce any of these so-called violations. The HOA could issue as many letters as they wanted, but without actual legal backing, they were nothing more than empty threats. With that knowledge in hand, I crafted my response. I printed out a formal letter of my own, citing specific sections of the HOA's own rule book to dismantle every single claim they had made against me. I included a statement from my lawyer, making it clear that any further harassment would be met with legal action. Then, just for good measure, I made copies of everything and delivered them not just to the HOA board, but to several other homeowners in the neighborhood. If Karen wanted to play games, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what was happening. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, some laughing at how badly Karen had overplayed her hand, others thanking me for standing up to her. A few even admitted that they had been too afraid to challenge her before, worried that she would make their lives miserable. But now that someone had called her bluff, they were starting to see just how weak her hold on the community really was. Karen, of course, was furious. She stormed up to my house that evening, her face red with anger, waving one of the copies of my letter in her hand. "You're trying to undermine the HOA," she snapped, her voice shaking. "This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable." I leaned against my door frame, arms crossed. "No, Karen," I said calmly. "I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat. "You think you can just ignore the rules?" I let out a slow breath. "I think," I said, "that you're used to people being too afraid to stand up to you. And now that someone finally has, you don't know what to do." She glared at me, opening her mouth to argue, but for once, she had nothing to say. Instead, she turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there with a satisfied smirk. The next few days were strangely quiet. No more fake violations, no more nasty letters. It was as if Karen was trying to figure out her next move, realizing that her usual tactics weren't working. And then, just when I thought things might be settling down, I got a call from Tom. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. "Karen's hosting an emergency HOA meeting tonight. And guess what the main topic is?" I already knew. "Me," I said. "You," Tom confirmed. "She's calling for an official vote to reprimand you for disruptive and uncooperative behavior." I let out a short laugh. "Let her try," I said. "She doesn't have the power to do anything." Tom chuckled. "Yeah, but it's going to be fun watching her try." That evening, I walked into the meeting, fully prepared for whatever nonsense Karen was about to spew. The room was packed, more people than usual attending just to see how this was going to play out. Karen sat at the front, her expression smug, clearly believing she had regained the upper hand. She stood, clearing her throat dramatically. "Due to recent events," she began, "we have gathered here to discuss the actions of a particular resident who has repeatedly displayed behavior that goes against the values of this community." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, waiting for her to dig her own grave. She went on, ranting about how I had deliberately defied HOA guidelines, how I had disrespected the integrity of our neighborhood, how my actions had created unnecessary division among residents. It was all a carefully crafted speech designed to make me look like the villain. When she finally finished, she turned to the rest of the board. "I propose that we issue an official warning," she said, "and that we take further action if this behavior continues." A long silence followed. Then, to my utter satisfaction, one of the board members, the same older woman who had questioned her at the last meeting, spoke up. "Karen," she said slowly, "I don't see any actual violations here. And frankly, this all seems personal." Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Karen's face went pale. One by one, board members voiced their thoughts. "We can't just target someone because of a personal dispute. This isn't what the HOA is for. We should be focusing on real issues, not this." Karen's eyes darted around, desperate for someone to back her up, but she found nothing. She had overplayed her hand one too many times. And just like that, the meeting ended with no action taken against me. As I walked out, Tom clapped me on the back. "You just took down Karen in front of the entire HOA," he said, grinning. "What's next?" I smirked. "Oh, I'm just getting started." Karen's defeat at the HOA meeting should have been the moment she realized she had lost, but people like her never give up that easily. The problem with someone who thrives on control is that when they start losing it, they become desperate. And Karen? She was drowning in desperation. For a few days after the meeting, things were eerily quiet. No more fake violation notices, no more passive-aggressive newsletters, no more trash mysteriously knocked over in front of my house. It almost felt like the storm had passed, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to retreat and reflect on her actions. She was the type to double down. And sure enough, the next sign of trouble came in the form of an email. Not a direct email from Karen, of course. She wouldn't dare communicate with me directly after the way things had gone down at the meeting. Instead, she sent out a neighborhood-wide announcement. It was a formal, wordy message about restoring the integrity of our community, a desperate plea to bring back the sense of unity that had been damaged by certain individuals. She never mentioned me by name, but it didn't take a genius to read between the lines. This was her way of rallying her supporters, trying to rebuild whatever authority she had left. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then came the real kicker, the final, desperate move that proved Karen had officially lost her mind. She tried to throw another wine night in my backyard. Again, I found out about it when Tom knocked on my door, phone in hand, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "You're not going to believe this," he wheezed, handing me his phone. It was another email, this time directly from Karen. "Join us for a beautiful evening of wine and conversation," it read. Same time, same place. Same place? My place? Again? For a moment, I actually stood there in stunned silence. Was she really this delusional? Had she learned absolutely nothing? Then, slowly, a grin spread across my face. If Karen wanted to make this a battle of stubbornness, she had picked the wrong opponent. I spent the rest of the day making preparations. Not for another argument, not for another meeting. No, this time I had something much better in mind. If Karen wanted to throw another backyard wine night, I was going to make sure it was a night she'd never forget. By the time the sun started to set, I was ready. I sat on my front porch, casually sipping a beer, waiting for the inevitable. And right on schedule, they arrived, Karen and her crew, dressed up like they were attending a high-class gala instead of trespassing onto private property like entitled lunatics. This time, she didn't even bother knocking. She strutted right into my backyard, leading her group with that same air of self-importance she always carried. I watched as they set up, laughing and chatting, pouring glasses of expensive wine as if nothing had ever happened, as if the last disaster with the sprinklers had been a minor inconvenience easily brushed aside. I gave them a few minutes, just long enough for everyone to settle in, just long enough for them to start relaxing. Then, with a satisfied nod, I pulled out my phone and activated Phase 1. The backyard lights flickered, then shut off completely, plunging everything into darkness. Confused murmurs spread through the group, and I heard Karen's sharp voice cutting through the chatter. "What's going on?" I didn't answer. I just waited. A moment later, the speakers I had hidden around the yard crackled to life. A deep, guttural growl filled the air, low and menacing. It was the kind of sound that sent chills down your spine, the kind of sound that made your instincts scream at you to run. The reaction was immediate. Someone gasped. Someone else let out a nervous laugh, trying to brush it off. But then the sound grew louder, layered with eerie, distant whispers, like something was lurking just out of sight. And that's when I activated the sprinklers. Not the regular, even spray from last time. This time, I had adjusted the settings for maximum chaos. High-pressure bursts shot out at random intervals, hitting different areas of the yard at unexpected moments. 1 second someone was dry. The next, they were getting blasted in the face with ice-cold water. The panic spread like wildfire. Shrieks filled the air as the group scrambled to escape, slipping on the wet grass, knocking over wine glasses and chairs in their haste. Karen, caught directly in one of the strongest jets of water, let out a strangled scream, arms flailing as she tried to shield herself. It was beautiful. By the time they reached the gate, they were drenched, furious, and utterly humiliated. Karen turned toward my house, her face twisted in rage. She started, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "Don't even try it," I said, stepping out onto the porch, my voice calm and amused. "I gave you one warning. You didn't listen. This is what happens when you trespass on my property." Her hands clenched into fists. "This is harassment," she shrieked. I tilted my head. "No, Karen. This is consequences." Tom, who had been watching the whole thing from his porch, let out a loud laugh. "Best show I've seen in years," he called out. The rest of the HOA ladies, too embarrassed to argue, quickly gathered their things and scurried away into the night. Karen lingered for a moment, trembling with fury, but she knew she had lost. Again. The next morning, she did the one thing I never thought I'd see. She put her house up for sale. It wasn't immediate, of course. She tried to spin the story in her favor, claiming she was simply moving on to better things. But everyone knew the truth. She had been defeated. Her iron grip on the neighborhood had crumbled, her reputation shattered, and without her power, she had nothing left. The HOA, in the wake of her departure, made some serious changes. The board voted in new leadership, people who actually cared about the community instead of just controlling it. They revised the rules, stripped away Karen's ridiculous policies, and made it clear that homeowners actually had a say in what happened to their property. And me? I finally got my backyard back. No more trespassers, no more surprise parties. Just peace and quiet, the way it should have been all along. Tom came over that evening, bringing a six-pack of beer with him. We sat on my patio, watching the sunset, enjoying the fact that for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood actually felt like a good place to live. So, he said, raising his bottle in a toast, what did we learn from all this? I took a sip of my drink, then grinned. Simple, I said. You mess with my backyard, you get the sprinklers. And with that, we clinked our bottles together, the final victory sealed.